Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Wine2Wine International Academy, announcing the 24th of our Italian Wine Ambassador courses to be held in London, Austria, and Hong Kong from the 27th to the 29th of July. Are you up for the challenge of this demanding course? Do you want to be the next Italian Wine Ambassador? Learn more and apply now at wine2wineinternational.com.
Italian Wine Podcast, a Wine2Wine Business Forum 2021 media partner, is proud to present a series of sessions highlighting the key themes and ideas from the two-day event held on October the 18th and 19th, 2021. This hybrid edition of the Business Forum was jam-packed with the most informed speakers discussing some of the hottest topics in the wine industry today. For more information, please visit wine2wine.net and tune in every Thursday at 2 p.m. Central European Time for more episodes recorded during this latest edition of Wine2Wine Business Forum.
Just going to introduce Valentina Argiolas, of course. She is not only the owner of Argiolas Winery of Sardinia, which we're very much looking forward to coming, by the way, in November, with the ambassadors. Sharon, are you coming? No, you can't come. She's working for another company now. Yes, they're not letting her go. Okay, this is what happens. You see, you think things are bad working for me, but then you go to another company and you're not as free as you think you are. Anyways, the whole point is, Valentina Argiolas will be moderating this session. Valentina Argiolas, of course, is also the president of the Grand Cru, which comprises of 80?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, 80 fine wine wineries. So I think this fits pretty well. You're familiar with the topic that Pauline will be speaking to. So let's get started. I don't want to waste any more time. Okay?
Okay. Hello, everybody. Ciao, Pauline. Let me to introduce Pauline before the presentation. Pauline was born and grew up in the wine growing region, and wine growing family too, in Burgundy. But she decided to move on, to change his life, she changed his path, and started working in the market research department in Burgundy, and then in the French embassy. And then she decided to move to London and to develop the concept of fine minds for fine wines, and finally, at the end, the creation of RMI Global. She's also a mother. She's very important. She has two beautiful girls, and also she's still studying. No, you don't stop studying, never. And for a Master of Wine, but also she's playing Ultimate Frisbee. I don't understand what is it.
Conversation.
We can do that after the meeting.
But it's the work sports balance line.
Ah.
When you work in wine and you eat and you drink, you have to compensate.
That's true.
Well, thank you so much, Valentina and Stevie, for that introduction, and it's great to be back here. And let's dive right into the topic of understanding the fine wine consumers. Before I do that, if I manage this, just to introduce you a bit more to RNI Global and what we do. So RNI Global is a research institute dedicated to fine wine. And why? Because uncertainty and change didn't start with COVID-19. Like, for a few years now, the world's been complex to understand, complicated to understand. And basically we take a funnel approach. Like, we try to understand the world we're living in, how the forces of change are likely to impact fine wine in the future, and what we can do about it. So we have we follow 6 forces of change. The first one is what we call changing society, or the fine wine evolving social framework. So how do people relate to fine wine? How do they relate with food? Where are they living? How are they living? How they understand their lives, and etc. So it's more linked to sociology and anthropology. Then we study the impact of the digital economy and technology on the future of fine wine, access to markets. So that's all the research that we do with linked to geopolitics, transport, logistics, Sustainability. So sustainability, you've heard about it today. We had a great conversation this morning on sustainability as well. But we are going to study both the environmental change and the social change around fine wine production and distribution. And usually financial sustainability is the third pillar of sustainability. We took it out. We wanted to make money one of the 6 main forces of change, because I personally believe that we don't talk enough about money in the wine world and about business model and being financially sustainable for the future. And the last forces of change that we're going to go a bit deeper in today is the fine wine consumer. So how are they changing? Where do they live? What do they expect from fine wine? What are they buying? How are they buying? Have they, patterns of behavioral patterns have changed over COVID and all of that. So the way that we work, we do traditional market research study, but we also do podcast article. We've got a big publication program, and we also work as a think tank. So we also chose to have a collective approach to all those changes and to all those big questions. So we ask questions and then we curate, we gather experts from both the wine world and outside of the wine world as well, from ambassadors to, geopolitical leaders, to the head of the London Stock Exchange, to all of those great people to come in and also think together with us about the future of fine wine. So that's the study that I'm going to present today. It's the second edition of the study that we are doing in partnership with Mestre, who's a négociant in la Place de Bordeaux, and whose main question was, we don't actually know who the fine wine consumers are. We need to understand who they are, where they are, how they behave. And in some ways it's user generated, because we've done the first study in 2019. We presented it in a couple of places, and then people came back with feedback about what they would like to know, the type of information that was missing in the study. And so we've done the second edition like this with that focus as well, trying to include a lot of extra questions. So if it's 84 pages long, what I'm going to present today, it's really a snapshot. And if you ever wanted to access the full study, Arini is a member organization, so you can become a member, get access to all the publication that we do. There's loads of free stuff on the website already, and you can also access some of the mini think tank session that we do. So first, when we talk about fine wine and the fine wine consumer, the first thing that we had to do is actually to define fine wine. And that was the starting point of Arini 4 years ago, because what on earth are we talking about when we're talking about fine wine, and how can we study the consumer if we don't know what fine wine is? So we first asked the trade, and it's been an ongoing project, which is called the Define Fine Wine Project. You can find the white paper online for free. It's the third edition. I'm working on the fourth. And we asked 200 members of the trade around the world what they thought were on fine wine, what it was. And we came up with a collective definition that I'm sure is going to change through time, but at that moment in time, that's the definition that we came up with. Fine wine needing those 4 dimensions to be considered fine. And if you look at it, so a fine wine is complex, balanced, with the potential to age. That's the first pillar. That's the first dimension. For those of you that are familiar with the Blick system of the WSCT, so it's balance, length, intensity, complexity, ageability. So it's the more objective dimension of fine wine, as much as we can be objective in wine. Then the second one, it's a wine that provokes emotion and wonders in the one drinking it. So often people differentiate a good wine with a great wine in the capacity of the great wine to provoke emotion and to stop time. So it was 1978 and my granddad opened that bottle of port and the fire was crackling and we were having that kind of food at that. So people remember exactly the taste of the wine even 20 years later. And while reflecting the expression of truth intended by its maker. I like that part because fine wine doesn't happen by mistake. There's an intent. There's the intention of a winemaker to actually do the best that he or she can do in a given environment, and what he or she thinks or interpret as the best that they can do as the truth about what being fine means. So there's really a relationship between the maker and the wine. And the last part, so the fourth pillar, it is environmentally, socially, and financially sustainable. That's the part that we've just added in the third edition. We didn't have that 2 years ago in the first definition of fine wine. And then when we did the second round of interviews, that was really a dimension through the trade. Maybe I won't have the time to talk about that dimension with the consumer, but at least with the trade, sustainability is really important. and defining how the traditional gatekeepers in the wine world are seeing also fine wine in the future. Just to give you a bit of a topic of conversation, and we can discuss that later with a glass of wine, but just to give you a bit of perspective. So this gentleman is Peter Giuliano. He's the head of the Specialty Coffee Association. And we had that conversation about what the hell is specialty coffee. And 5 years ago, they had a definition about specialty coffee, like the premium coffee, that was very close to ours. That was about the quality of the green beans, the quality of the roasting process, the quality of all that. They had an aroma wheels that they get inspiration from the wine world as well. And the green coffee had to taste this and this and that. Then 5 years ago, they say, no, we're going to change that. We're going to do a totally different approach to that. And specialty coffee is whatever the consumer think is special. So the first thing that I like to notice is that, so we go to the Coffee Specialty Association that has 100% consumer centric kind of definition. And our definition, even if, the consumer is only here because we need someone to drink the wine. So it's like kind of to opposite pole in how we interact with the consumer, one which is just needed to put the product in light, and the one, so we can discuss that later with a glass of wine. It's a full conversation about if it's good, if it's better, if it's less good. Anyway, so when we decided to approach that year study with a bit more quantitative data, and we wanted to understand if we could segment the fine wine market and the fine wine consumer, when we went into again quantitative data, we had to put a price on fine wine. So as you've seen in our collective definition, there's no notion of price. It's not a fine wine is expensive, and expensive is 150 euro a bottle. But when we had to measure things, we couldn't compare pear and oranges. So we took that 3 tier of price, which is based on La Place de Bordeaux price. So it's a very Bordeaux biased definition price of fine wine, but we had to start it somewhere to measure the market. And when you look at this, you see, the first thing that you see is that the price point in fine wine, although in the most expensive bracket of wine in general, are still very, very diverse. And from someone that was going to buy a bottle at £40 or 40 euro a bottle, and someone that's going to buy an 800 bottle of wine on a regular level, we might not talk to the same consumers. Or are we going to talk to the same consumers? That was going to be one question. So we also had 2 different methodology. We had a quantitative approach with Wine Intelligence, where we studied 4 main markets, which is the US, the UK, China, and Hong Kong. And also we kept our qualitative approach with High Networth Individuals because they're unlikely to respond to a questionnaire. So we have a program of 20 interviews a year where we meet them and we try to understand how they engage with wine. And the question was, do they interact the same way as normal consumer behind bracket? So when I'm quoting Wine Intelligence data, that mainly refers to people that engage with the first tier of wine. I'm not saying that they're not engaging with the other tier, but people that normally answer to a questionnaire are more likely to answer to that category. So we wanted to know how big the market is, what's the size of the market. And so in the 4 countries that we actually studied, so what Wine Intelligence did is that they took the percentage of wine buyers, and within the percentage of wine buyers, we wanted to understand how many are actually buying fine wine. So we've determined a minimum price, which is a consumer-facing price that was $75 in the US, 50 in the UK, and 500 Hong Kong dollars or RMB in China. And if they didn't buy that price over that price point, that they couldn't continue with the study. And so within the fine wine buyers, within the wine buyers in the US, which is 1 out of 3 adults, if my memory serves me well, 7% of them buy wine that are over $75. And so that's, I think, again, but I'm sorry because I don't have my notes with me, but it's 1 out of 20 adults. It's 2% of the global US population, and it's 7% of the wine buyers. And that's the same process with the UK. The numbers with Hong Kong and China are really, really higher because the base for wine buyers is, the sample is smaller, because Wine Intelligence only studied people that lives in urban center. So I think it's the first 2 tiers, and people that buy imported wines. So it's not the whole Chinese population. It's not the whole wine buyers in China. It's already a smaller category. And within that category, how many of them are buying fine wine? And that's also why the percentage are higher. Then we wanted to know, so we have our minimum determined price. Are they buying cheaper wines? Are they buying more expensive wines? So for each country, we determined a segmentation of the price, and we wanted to understand if they were going to buy higher or cheaper. And again, in China, it's in Asia, it's a bit different with the numbers because again, the sample size is a bit different. But the answer is yes. People that buy $75 in the US, people that buy £50 wine in the UK, they're all also buying. Most of them are buying cheaper wines up to the first category, which is £10 and under, and they're also buying above the price. So they're not exclusively buying expensive stuff. Then we asked them what they thought about fine wine, because we had our own trade definition and we wanted to understand if the consumers were thinking the same about fine wine and how do they perceive fine wine? What are the attributes that was important to them in order to be qualified a wine as fine? And what's interesting is we've got 3 different sets of results. There are the ones that are true across the board, which is the capacity of a wine to age, which doesn't mean that you can't drink it young. I had a question about, a Sirtico or Fiano di Avellino, which are like white wines that are beautiful young. It doesn't, and people usually drink young. It doesn't mean that they can age. It's not because people choose to drink them young that they can't age. It's a different thing. But that's across the board. Fine wine has to go through time. And the role of critics is also important across the board. The score from critics and the notes from critics are also very, very important. So that's East and West the same. Then we've got a difference between West and East, where in the West, in the UK and the US, the notion of typicity and authenticity is more important, and the complexity of taste is also very important. So it's more related to how the wine tastes. And then in Asia, we see that the notion of scarcity and rarity is a bit more important. And then finally, where everyone also agrees is on the attributes that are not important and not considered important for a consumer in order to determine if the wine is fine or not, which is the price. So we try to measure if the wine needed to be expensive for consumer to actually consider it fine. And that's always, we measure 17 attributes, and it's always within the bottom 3. Consumers don't really think of wine as, expensive being part of the definition. And also the capacity for the wine to tell a story. We were trying to measure, I don't know if you know Hugh Johnson quote about a fine wine is a wine worth talking about. So we wanted to measure the resonance of storytelling. And it's also something, so maybe we didn't ask the question correctly, but people didn't really resonated with that story. A wine doesn't need to have a story to be considered fine. Sorry, that was the conclusion. And then the last one is sustainability. And at the moment, fine wine consumers do not think that a wine needs to be sustainable to be fine, or that a wine cannot be fine if it's not sustainable, if it's more on that way around.
Are you enjoying this podcast? There is so much more high-quality wine content available from Mama Jumbo Shrimp. Check out our new wine study maps, our books on Italian wine, including Italian Wine Unplugged, The Jumbo Shrimp Guide to Italian Wine, Sangiovese Lambrusco and Other Stories, and much, much more on our website, mamajumboshrimp.com. Now back to the show.
Then we ask them about semantic association and what the type of wording that they associate. I'm going to go a bit quicker with those numbers because you will have access to the presentation if you want to go back to. And I wanted to talk to you a bit more about Italian wines as well and how they fit in the picture. But long story short, the attributes and the words that they choose to describe fine wine are very positive and engaging. No one is saying it's elitist, something that it's not for me or stuff like that. So they all associate words that are quite positive. So that's one of the slides that I wanted to present to you, because we wanted also to understand what they buy. So what, in terms of origin, where the fine wine came from. And I think that's something that's not going to be a surprise for all of you, is the big trends that we see and that we've seen accelerated during COVID is the diversity of origin. I think Bordeaux was 90% of the secondary market 15 years ago. It's 42%. It was 42% in 2020. So people are still buying Bordeaux. People are still buying Bordeaux to put in their cellar, and it's still considered a main fine wine across the board. But we see more and more other origins coming up, and Italy's been one of those origins that's really rise during COVID and has been bought in a bigger proportion during COVID than the rest of the world. And when you speak to collectors or high net worth individuals, they're super excited about that diversification. They're super excited about having some other stuff to try. Maybe not to invest in yet, but at least to buy, to drink, sometimes even to collect, because there's a difference between collectability and investibility, if that's a word. But yeah, they're very excited about having more origin to pick from and to choose from. So I'm usually asked, where's the next origin of fine wine? So, can Sardinia be the next fine wine destination and origin? And when you talk to James Mice and LiveX, he explains quite clearly that to be at least collectible and appear in the secondary market, a wine region needs three things. You need an exports market, because fine wine, the status of fine wine of scarcity or rarity is not going to be given to you by your local market. You're not scarce, you're not rare, you're just next door. You're not a luxury kind of association for your local market. So, Bordeaux wouldn't be Bordeaux with the British, Burgundy wouldn't be Burgundy without, China. We all need an export market to give us the fine wine status. Then the second thing is a very clear hierarchy of quality. So people need to understand very quickly why they pay 100% more, for why they pay €5 for a wine from that region, but why they pay also €200 from a wine from the same region. And the last thing is they need a very long history of quality, and it's consistency through time. So, you can't be a fine wine overnight. It goes, or a fine wine region overnight. It goes with time and consistency. You can dig in a bit more about the occasion of fine wine consumption. Why are people buying fine wine for? Well, for special events and celebration, but also as a treat to themselves. So they use it as a social medium, but they also use it in the privacy of their home. And of course, they've been doing this a lot over the last 2 years. And that's also why sometimes they even change. So we had those it's anecdotal, but we had so many people in Asia telling us that, like, in the freedom of their home, without the peer pressure of bringing this or that bottle of wine, they could actually explore, for example, with Italian wines, because, they're considered cheaper than Bordeaux usually. So in my house, I can actually drink that because it's very good quality, and I don't risk not having those social status that I need to have when I go out. Then we ask them about the selection criteria. So how do they select wine? What's the decision tree to buy wine? And it's interesting. I'm just going to talk about the vintage because, again, the notion of time is really important for fine wine. And it's also really important for fine wine drinkers and buyers. So they have most of them are so knowledgeable. They know vintage by heart. They know the quality of a vintage, and they understand price variation according to vintage most of the time. And so they will, like, vintage is key. And for regions that have a shorter history with fine wine or have maybe less vintage variation, that's something they will have to work up with as well, the relationship with vintage and the fine wine consumer. And then very quickly, I just wanted to focus really quickly on the high net worth individuals. So those people that we don't interview through questionnaires, but we do face-to-face interview with, really trying to understand. So they're around the world. They're all age, all gender. Because also that's something that I didn't mention about the consumer before, is the gender, where it's male dominated in the US and the UK. So 70% of those drinkers are male, 30% are female. In Asia, it's 50-50. So when we were trying to segment, there's really a difference between West and East about who's buying fine wine. So our high net worth individuals, what we actually see is that, of course, they demand to be seen as individuals, but they have the means to actually being treated as individual and very tailored experience and approach. But what's interesting is a move from demographics to intent. So I see more common point about the motivation in buying fine wine than common point in how they behave depending on their age, depending on their gender, or depending on where they are based internationally. It's really depending on the type of relationship they've got with wine that's going to influence their fine wine buying pattern and behavior. And they've got they all share similar characteristics across the board. So usually so far, they are people that are highly, highly curious. They keep on learning all the time. They are super price aware. They are international. They've got full house with adapted buying patterns in all those house, and still men dominated, apart from some parts of Asia where it's kind of 50-50 with women. And those are the four segmentation of collectors that we see. What we call status seeker is that people that are interested in, showing themselves with a bottle of fine wine to demonstrate status. Some of them are passionate, they're deep diver. They know so much. They actually know more than the trade now, and they've got quite an impact on some collectors' market. So those are another category of consumer. Then we have the affluent, which are also called the just rich, people buying expensive wine just because they have more money, but they're not particularly more engaged with the product. They're buying the same way that I would buy a 20 euro bottle of wine or that my mom would buy a 5 euro bottle of wine. It's just we don't have the same financial capacity. And then the last one is the collector drinker. So people that buy to collect, drink, and sometimes invest a bit on the side as well. And to me, it's more interesting to look at the fine wine consumer through those profiles than through any kind of demographics. So that's a podcast that we've done on Inside the Mind of the Collector. If you want to hear a bit more how collectors work and how they think in their head, you can access that on the website. And I just wanted to finish on that. So basically, to conclude that very brief presentation of 2 years of work, but the fine wine consumers have a variety of consumer profile, and there's a diversity of audience. Like there's no one fine wine consumer, as I'm sure you could have guessed. They all are highly engaged with the product, and they associate fine wine with positive attributes and desirable traits. So it's kind of positive for the fine wine world at the moment. It's highly regarded as a category, and the diversification of style and origin that we are seeing is positively seen by consumers and trade. So it's, again, quite positive. And high net worth individuals have more money, and they've used fine wine to invest and to drink more. So, yeah. So this is the good side of the thing. This is actually, fine wine is in a good place at the moment. If you want to read that latest publication, which is called A Year in Conversation, there are some sources of worry. Like not everything is pink, but I don't have the time to present what's not pink in the fine wine world. But you can also read that. It's accessible for free on our website if you want to understand the forces of change that might change that very bright picture that I've painted today.
Grazie, Pauline. I spend all my day listening with you about this very important topic. I have the first question: how the pandemic influenced the perception of fine wine in the market and the perception of consumer of fine wines?
Well, again, you will have to define a bit more the market and then the segment of fine wine consumer. But basically, generally speaking, the pandemic has been good for wine drinking. At least people have been buying quite a lot, at least in the UK and the US, which are the two markets which I'm the most familiar with in terms of hard data. People have seen an increase in either the cheaper part of the portfolio or the most expensive one. So people have started not only drinking what they had in their cellar, but also buying differently because they were drinking differently. We had consumers that tell us we've bought more champagne because now I'm not drinking with my work colleague, I'm drinking with my wife, and my wife likes sparkling. Or we had collectors that also say, well, we didn't really touch the Bordeaux this year, but we bought more Italian wines because we think they're more ready to drink quicker. So instead of, drinking Lafite and Latour, they drunk Sassicaia or Neraia and all those great Italian wines. They also sometimes they were in the comfort of their place, so they could try Asiatico from Greece. Again, it really depends on what the intent was with wine and the type of relationship they had with the merchants and the supplier. But that's the trend that I've been seeing.
Also because we have more time at disposal to enjoy life and then enjoy good wine. Someone, some question for Pauline?
Felicity Carter. Pauline, do you have any insights into the ways that European collectors are different from the English-speaking world in Asia?
So how the European collectors based in Europe are different from the English-speaking based in Asia.
Okay, so Sotheby's has just opened up in France. So do you think the Europeans are behaving like the rest of the world? Or I realise this isn't got nothing to do with the research you've presented. So
no, so I don't know the value of my answer. It might just be my own thoughts. I think there's And maybe you can actually link that to people in Europe not relying on American and Asian tourists, for example. The data that was just presented before on tourism, and that's also what we've been hearing, is that everyone thought the European winery tourism was going to collapse because normally European people don't spend money on tourism. They actually did this year, and loads of very premium winery have made a reasonable amount of money just with European tourists. So maybe that would be that. I think maybe the world of fine wine investment has overseen European collectors because they were too focused on American and Asia, and now they realize but that's just a maybe. I don't know. That would be one of my guess.
Have you done any study into the correlation between fine wine markets and financial markets?
So that was one of the things, because again, and I wish I had more time to explain the different, to me, there's really a difference between collectors and investors. And that's sometimes something that we mix in the fine wine world, because they can be the same person, but the investors, they can also be not related. They cannot be collectors. I mean, investors can be people that don't really care about wine and are never going to drink the bottles. And when we look at what investors invest in, that's really interesting to see. How, after 27, that changed also the amount of wine that was bought for investment, and actually looking at the different results of wine as an investment product has been really good this year. It's been better than gold, if I believe some of the latest.
It's now the most investment.
It's better than swag, which is silver, wine, art, and gold.
And versus.
Yeah.
So have you seen any direct correlation? Because I only know this in layman's terms, having watched the markets.
Yeah.
We're usually the auction markets are usually 3 to 6 months ahead of financial markets in the U.S. Is that similar? Do you find?
So I haven't. I'm actually looking into it in there because I also want to understand the currency market and how the currency market affects fine wine investment. But I'm looking into this now. I don't have exact answer. I'll touch base with you in a couple of months. That would be an interesting conversation.
Pauline, Dave Parker, by the way, and I enjoyed your speech
Nice
very much. Regarding the three main generations, as we view them in the U.S. anyway, baby boomers, Gen X, and millennials, do you see any difference in adoption speed or characteristics in terms of what they're looking for at a particular age?
What's interesting is, again, that will be different from each of the market that we study. But for example, apparently in the US, wine as a category is not doing so well with younger people, millennials in particular, but fine wine is. So that's really where it's interesting to study wine and fine wine differently, because it doesn't have the same exact audience when it comes to this. So that's one of the things Wine Intelligence has seen, is that I think, and again, top of my mind, 45% of the consumer that they interviewed that actually buying wines that are over $75 and above were between 35 and 54. So it's quite a very important category for fine wine as well. If that's the answer to your question, I hope that's your answer to your question. But that would be different in the UK, and that would be different in Asia as well. So again, each market will have sensible difference. But I am not particularly concerned. Well, I'm always concerned, but I don't see young consumers deserting the fine wine space as much as they desert the wine space, if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hi, this is Xiao. So I want to ask a question regarding to how do these fine wine consumers purchase their wine? Do you have data on the channels they're buying their wines from?
Where are they buying the wine from?
Yes.
So again, the data from Wine Intelligence is about people that buy their wine in their own country. Is that your question?
No, where, for example, they go to the consultant, or they go.
So it's different on any country, and that's also part of the study. We've studied this, and I'm sorry because I'm not going to quote data because I'm too afraid of being wrong. But yeah, we've studied where they actually access fine wine from. And every market has a specificity. Every market has a form of fine wine merchants. I'm going to be very British and use that term. And usually there's a lot of fine wine consumers They are looking for a personal relationship. And the equivalent of fine wine merchant, that is slightly different in Asia and slightly different in the US, they play a very important role in defining the consumer's palate and defining the consumer's access. And one of the things that we've seen through the pandemic is that the relationship between fine wine merchants and the consumers has tightened up because they were still looking for it was kind of balanced, nearly opposed relation. Like they wanted technology because they wanted to be able to buy and online very quickly, but they also wanted to have the personal touch and to have the equivalent of their fine wine merchant, somebody that they know and they trust, because it takes quite a lot of time to develop knowledge about wine or actually to know what to buy. And they actually, the role of humans in influencing what people buy is really important across the market.
Yeah.
Takes different shape and form, but very important.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. A round of applause for Pauline, Vicard, and Valentina Argiolas.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Italian Wine Podcast, brought to you by Wine Italy Academy, home of the gold standard of Italian wine education. Do you want to be the next ambassador? Apply online at wineitalyinternational.com for courses in London, Austria, and Hong Kong, the 27th to the 29th of July. Remember to subscribe and like Italian Wine Podcast and catch us on SoundCloud, Spotify, and wherever you get your pods. You can also find our entire back catalog of episodes at ItalianWinePodcast.com.
Hi guys, I'm Joy Livingston and I am the producer of the Italian Wine Podcast. Thank you for listening. We are the only wine podcast that has been doing a daily show since the pandemic began. This is a labor of love and we are committed to bringing you free content every day. Of course, this takes time and effort, not to mention the cost of equipment, production, and editing. We would be grateful for your donations, suggestions, requests, and ideas. For more information on how to get in touch, go to ItalianWinePodcast.com.